The wind always announced itself before anything else on the frontier. It came low and restless, sliding over the endless stretch of dry grass carrying dust, cold, and the quiet warning that this land belonged to no one. Elias Crow stood outside his homestead, coat pulled tight against his broad frame, watching the sky harden into a dull gray. He had learned to read the weather the way other men read books. The clouds told him there would be no rain, only wind and disappointment, the kind that dried the earth a little more each day. His homestead was modest, 4 walls, a patched roof, a corral leaning slightly to the east, and fields that never quite gave back what he put into them. Still, it was his. He had built it with hands that no longer remembered softness. Each scar across his knuckles had a story, though none he felt the need to tell. Out here, words were wasted unless they served a purpose. Elias had been alone for so long that solitude felt like a second skin. The days followed a predictable rhythm. Rise before dawn, tend the animals, fight the soil, mend what broke, sleep when the body demanded it. There was no one to argue with, no one to disappoint. The land was harsh but honest. If it took from you, it did so without apology. That afternoon, as the wind sharpened and the light thinned, Elias noticed movement near the far edge of his property. At first he thought it was a coyote, low to the ground, struggling against the gusts. But the shape was wrong, too upright, too unsteady. He squinted, shielding his eyes. The figure stumbled, caught itself, then staggered again. No one walked alone out here unless they had no other choice. Elias swung himself onto his horse without a second thought. The distance closed slowly, the wind fighting every step. As he drew nearer, he saw her clearly. A woman, younger than he'd expected. Her dress faded and torn at the hem, boots worn thin. Her bonnet hung loose from one hand, hair whipping across her face. Dust clung to her skin, and her lips were cracked with thirst. She nearly collapsed when she saw him. Elias dismounted quickly, catching her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing, as if the land had already begun to claim her. "Easy," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and pressed it into her trembling hands. She drank like someone who had forgotten what relief felt like. When she finally lowered the canteen, her eyes met his. They were gray-blue, dulled by exhaustion, but still sharp with awareness. "My name is Clara," she said, as if offering proof that she still existed. Elias nodded. He didn't ask questions yet. Out here, survival came before stories. He lifted her onto the horse and led them back toward the homestead, walking beside her to keep her steady. She swayed with each step, but she did not complain. Inside the house, the air smelled of wood smoke and earth. Elias helped her to the small table and set another cup of water before her. She sat quietly, hands wrapped around it, taking in her surroundings, the rough-hewn walls, the single window, the signs of a life stripped down to necessity. When she was strong enough, the words came slowly. A wagon train headed west. A broken axle, days of waiting, fever that took her mother before sunrise, promises made by strangers who said they would return with help, promises that never did. Finally, walking alone because staying had become a slower kind of death. Elias listened without interrupting. He had heard different versions of the same story before. The frontier was full of abandoned plans and forgotten people. "You can stay," he said simply when she finished. She looked at him, searching his face for something. Doubt, expectation, danger. She found none, just tired certainty. That night, Elias gave her the smaller room. He fixed the loose latch on the door, not because he feared her, but because the wind demanded respect. He ate his meal in silence, aware of her presence in the next room, the soft sounds of movement reminding him that he was no longer alone. Days passed, then more days. Clara recovered strength slowly. She insisted on helping despite his protests. She swept, cooked simple meals, stitched tears in his shirts with careful hands. She did not ask for pity, nor did she act as though she were owed anything. That, Elias noticed, set her apart. He showed her the land, not as something to conquer, but as something to endure. He taught her how to tell when frost would come early, how to save water, how to listen for trouble in the silence. She learned quickly, adapting in ways that surprised him. There was a quiet determination in her, a refusal to be erased. At night, they sometimes sat on opposite sides of the room, the fire between them. Words were scarce, but not uncomfortable. Elias found himself listening for her breathing before sleep, a habit that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The wind continued its relentless song outside, scraping at the walls, testing the roof. The land did not soften, but something inside Elias did slowly. almost without his consent. He began to notice small things. The way Clara hummed while she worked. The way she paused to watch the sunrise as if it were a promise instead of a warning. Neither of them spoke of the future. On the frontier, tomorrow was never guaranteed. Yet in the shared silence and the steady rhythm of surviving together, something fragile took root. It was not yet love, not yet named, but it was there, quiet, persistent, and strong enough to endure a harsh land that had forgotten how to be kind. Winter came without mercy, as it always did on the frontier. It arrived first in the silence, a strange stillness that pressed against the land before the snow ever fell. Elias felt it in his bones when he stepped outside one morning and found the world holding its breath. The sky was pale, almost colorless, and the wind, usually restless, had gone eerily quiet. He knew then that this winter would not be kind. By the first heavy snowfall, the fences disappeared beneath white drifts, and the familiar paths around the homestead vanished as if they had never existed. Clara watched from the doorway as Elias fought through the cold each day, chopping wood, checking the animals, repairing what the ice tried to break. She had never seen a man work with such quiet endurance. He did not complain, did not curse the sky. He simply did what had to be done, even as the cold carved deeper lines into his face. Supplies dwindled faster than expected. The storms were relentless, piling snow upon snow, cutting off any chance of reaching the nearest settlement. Elias measured each sack of flour, each strip of dried meat with careful calculation. Clara noticed that his portions grew smaller, while hers remained the same. At first she said nothing. Pride lived deep in him, and she sensed that pushing too soon would only harden his silence. Nights were the hardest. The wind returned with fury, howling like a wounded animal, shaking the walls, forcing its way through every crack. They sat close to the fire, not touching, but aware of the fragile warmth they shared. Clara could hear Elias's breathing change when the house creaked too loudly, when the roof groaned under the weight of ice. This land had taught him to expect loss. One evening, after discovering him pretending to eat while pushing food around his plate, Clara finally spoke. Her voice was gentle but firm. She told him she would not survive, knowing he starved for her sake. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted. He admitted quietly that he did not know how to save them both if the winter worsened. It was the closest he had come to fear since she had known him. The storm that followed was worse than any before it. Snow fell so thick it erased the horizon. The wind screamed without pause. In the middle of the night, a sharp crack split the darkness. A roof beam weakened by ice gave way. Elias grabbed his coat and climbed onto the roof without hesitation. Clara begged him to wait for daylight, but he shook his head. Daylight might come too late. She heard his cry before she saw him fall. The sound cut through the storm and froze her blood. By the time she reached him, the snow around his body was already stained dark. Panic threatened to take her, but something stronger rose in its place. Survival. She dragged him inside. With raw determination, ignoring the pain tearing through her arms, she cleaned his wound, wrapped him in every blanket they owned, and kept the fire alive through the longest night of her life. Days blurred together. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, feverish and weak. Clara spoke to him constantly, telling him stories of her childhood, of dreams she had buried when the wagon broke down, of gardens she wanted to plant when spring returned. She told him she refused to survive this land only to lose him to it. Whether he heard her or not, she did not know. When Elias finally opened his eyes fully, the storm had passed. The world outside lay buried, silent and bright beneath the sun. Clara sat beside him, exhaustion etched into her face. When he reached for her hand, she startled, then laughed softly through tears she had held back too long. He tried to speak, but she stopped him, pressing his hand against her cheek. In that moment, words were unnecessary. Recovery was slow. Elias could not work as he once had, and the burden of survival shifted between them. Clara proved stronger than even she had believed. She learned to trap small animals, rationed with careful discipline, and kept hope alive when the days stretched thin. Elias watched her move through the homestead with quiet awe. She was no longer a guest. She was the heart of the place. Spring arrived hesitantly, as if unsure it was welcome. Snow melted into mud, and the first green shoots broke through the stubborn soil. When neighbors finally reached the homestead, drawn by rumors that someone had survived the brutal winter alone, they found something unexpected. They found two people standing side by side, changed but unbroken. Years passed. The homestead grew stronger, not richer but fuller. Laughter replaced long silences. The land remained harsh, but it no longer felt empty. Travelers spoke of Elias and Clara in hushed, respectful tones. They said love had taken root, where nothing else should have survived. They said the frontier had tried to break them and failed, and so their story lived on, not in books or legends of violence, but in quiet proof that even the harshest land could not destroy a soft heart willing to love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable frontier legends.